in Puerto Rico, in Florida, South Carolina. You know, how does, you know, redoubling our commitment to do everything we can to help these communities recover fully and sustainably. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Diane.
Jen, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. What an extraordinarily busy time it is right now. And for you to take time out of your schedule and join us is so appreciated. It's really heartening to hear, to be reminded of what a strong team there is right now at HUD, what an incredibly strong leadership team. Many of the people you mentioned, Solomon Green, Mary McFadden, and certainly your leadership and the leadership of the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary are so needed and appreciated right now. So thank you for all of your hard work now and in the months and years to come. And we look forward to continued partnership in the work.
Beautiful. Thanks, Diane. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jen.
Thanks for having me here.
So we'll turn now to our next speaker. Again, we will be hearing from somebody from the White House who will be joining us a little later in the call. But now we're going to move on to hearing updates from disaster impacted communities. And again, here I'm just so grateful for all of the community leaders that have joined us today during such an incredibly challenging time to share with us what is happening on the ground, what their needs are, what the challenges are, and how we can work together to advocate to support them in the long recovery ahead. So first, I'm really pleased to welcome back to this call Ariadna Gaudreau-Aubert. She's the founder and executive director of Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico. Ariadna, thank you so much for joining. I will turn it over to you. Ariadna, we cannot hear you, so you may still be muted. I think you're joining from your phone, so you may have to unmute yourself. Ariadna, are you there? Well, I can see that you are here, but we can't hear you. Okay, why don't we try to sort out if there's something we can do on our end for Ariadna. Certainly she and others in Puerto Rico are challenged right now with a lot of connectivity and electricity issues related to the disaster. So we will hold off on Ariadna and come back to her as soon as possible. And instead, let me see if Marie-Thérèse is available. Marie-Thérèse Padilla-Rodriguez is the Director of Policy and Advocacy for Puerto Rico Operations with the Hispanic Federation. Marie-Thérèse, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, great. I will turn it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I do want to say that I am having problems with the power and connectivity. So if something happens, I'm sorry. So thank you for the invitation and to the National Low Income Housing Coalition for always being supporting Puerto Rico's recovery, to NOAA that has been really a great support to our advocacy efforts here in Puerto Rico also. I want to thank him. And I want to take the people that are here from HUD and all the federal agencies. I want to take the time that I have to make clear ask to HUD and to FEMA that can be elevated and that we need to have that happen now after the Fiona disaster. First, I know HUD has been working to give more flexibility in the requirements and ways that the people in Puerto Rico can access the aid of the agency, but there's something that is really a huge barrier for local community and nonprofit organizations that are the first responders after an emergency, and that's the reimbursements and matching fund requirements. We know there's a temporary waiver on that that the president announced, but we think that in terms of Puerto Rico context, if you really want the local organizations and local communities to be able to engage in the programs and be part of the recovery and have a more and, you know, get the bottleneck out of the recovery, we need those type of barriers to be waived permanently, the reimbursement and matching requirements. Also important, Hispanic Federation has been providing supplies around the impacted communities, and we have seen a lot of people that are living in blue tarps since Hurricane Maria and the earthquakes. So even though the R3 program is trying to address as much as possible, it is unacceptable that this blue tarp, the blue tarp situation that we are seeing in the impacted community. So if somehow HUD with the Puerto Rico Housing Department can act more immediately with those survivors that had to face Fiona on the blue tarp, that should be a priority. Another important element that needs to be considered is that HUD has an opportunity to impact the energy grid in Puerto Rico with the $1.9 billion that have been allocated to the energy grid, CDBG-DR funds that are being allocated for our energy grid. With Fiona, Hispanic Federation installed, before Fiona, the Hispanic Federation installed solar equipment in fisheries, like in Nahuabo, and we have seen that it works. Rooftop solar works. The fisheries are working. They didn't lose their product. They help the community with their medicine and to recharge equipment like energy oasis in the communities. So we urge HUD and the Puerto Rico Housing Department to use the energy funding that they have to truly deploy energy resiliency with rooftop solar. Another important request is that in the allocation notice that it's probably coming after Fiona, we need more public participation requirements. We need the Citizen Advisory Committee to be a reality in Puerto Rico for the recovery, and to be a requirement for the federal agency that that type of public participation space is effective and needs to be created, not only for CDBG needs. If there's a question about what is this a Citizen Advisory Committee, I can talk more about it, but basically it's a space where it is supposed to have voices of the community, the third sector, and other stakeholders to ensure the effective use of the federal funding. That committee has not been officially created, and we have been asking for it in Puerto Rico since 2018. So we hope that it is created, and also for the allocation notice of Fiona, it is included. That's regarding HUD. Regarding FEMA, I wanna raise the concern that when you call to the 1-800 number to fill out the individual assistance application for the survivors, the waiting time is 358 minutes approximately. I have the video I called. When you have communities without power, that they don't have a battery for the cell phone, FEMA cannot be expecting that they are going to wait 358 minutes in line to fill the application. That's unacceptable. The other thing that we need urgently is that the case manager and the inspectors from the individual assistant of FEMA needs to be capacitated employees that first either are bilingual or have translator. We need the survivors in Puerto Rico to understand what is happening with the aid. Also, we already know that, for example, there are a lot of flyers that from FEMA that is giving information on how to prove ownership and occupancy. And even though they're talking about the alternative document, that you don't need a deed or a formal title to get the aid, and that you can present alternative documentation, those flyers and information are not explaining to the survivors that now the individual assisted guidelines allows for a statement of the survivor of why they have a property interest in that house, to get access to the FEMA aid. So we need the case managers and the inspectors and the information that FEMA is giving to the survivors to provide that alternative that they have if the documents are not, if they don't have the documents to present and prove their occupancy and ownership. Also, yes, the major disaster declaration that was made, it had a lot of amendments to get the 78 municipalities within the major disaster declaration. So the periods or the timelines to apply for FEMA are different among municipalities. And we think that's not good for the people because there are too many deadlines. So we think FEMA should just make an extension up to the latest deadline so that everybody has the most time possible to apply. We also think that, as I said before, there's a lot of people that are living in blue tarps or, on secure housing since Maria and the earthquake. And a lot of the applications were denied by FEMA because of title issues that now the public policy changed. So we think that during this process, they need to reopen those cases and give the opportunity to those people to get the Maria aid and the earthquake aid that they were denied or unfairly. Important, we need an educational campaign. The application needs to be filed online, and the process, even though it's more friendly than the previous one, still FEMA needs to go out and explain people how to fill this documentation, maybe in the news, in Spanish, in the radio, so that people understand the process, making videos in Spanish with section by section of the application. I think that doesn't exist and needs to be created. Another ask is that if a person has a loan from previous disaster and they lost their home now with Fiona, we are asking for the loan forgiveness of the forgiveness of those loans. And finally, I want to mention that definitely technical assistance was mentioned before. Technical assistance to municipality and nonprofits so that they can help people accessing the aid and also to access themselves as institutions, the federal funding. I hope I didn't talk too quickly. I was trying to present all the asks I wanted to present. So if there's any question, I'm more than welcome to answer.
Yeah, thank you, Marie-Therese. No, that was just right. And I appreciate how specific and concrete all of your requests are. I do see that we have a good number of staff from Capitol Hill, from key Senate and representative offices, as well as from the administration on the line. And I'm sure I hope they're taking really good notes. I will say that the Disaster Housing Recovery Coalition, we take our lead from local impacted organizations and people on what the priorities should be. And so towards the end of the call, we'll show via slides many of these same priorities that Marie-Therese just laid out. So Marie-Therese, there was a question about people with disabilities. Can you speak to how people with disabilities on Puerto Rico have been impacted by Fiona and what specific recommendations or needs they have?
Oh, yeah. The elderly and the disabled are in the worst situation because there's extreme poverty in Puerto Rico. When you combine all the disability, the elderly situation, and the extreme poverty without power, they are in critical need of help. And these are people that cannot go to, they don't have cell phones to call to FEMA. They cannot go to centers. And we have been visiting and trying. We have provide some supplies to this type of community. But one thing that we think is that this population has a disproportionate burden during this process. And one of the things that we have been asking to the federal government, the Biden administration and Congress, is to provide the SSI benefits to this community. SSI is supposed to give around $800 to the elderly, disabled, and blind people, but the Social Security Administration denied this benefit to the disabled and elderly in Puerto Rico, the U.S. citizens that live in Puerto Rico, just because they live in Puerto Rico. And the Supreme Court last year validated that discrimination against this vulnerable population in Puerto Rico in the Baello Madero case. But still, the Congress has the discretion to give access to the elderly and disabled in Puerto Rico to the SSI benefits so that they can confront this type of situation. And also, I think FEMA should create somehow a service to help them apply for the aid, because if they cannot move, they cannot, or they don't have, we have a lot of issues of broadband access, digital divide. So not everybody in Puerto Rico has internet, cell phones, that we need the responders to understand that reality.
Okay, thank you so much, Marie-Thérèse. I really appreciate you joining this call again during such a difficult and hectic time. And we'll certainly have you back in the future and continue to work with you on all of the priorities that you laid out. Thank you for joining us. So we are still expecting Ariadna from Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico to join, but she's not with us yet. So we're going to move now to Florida and hear about impacts and needs from Hurricane Ian. And we'll start with Kathy Grunwald, who's the disaster coordinator attorney from Legal Services of North Florida. Kathy, thank you so much for joining us. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Diane, for asking me to be here to talk about Hurricane Ian, which just made landfall in Florida less than a week ago, about 6 days ago. And a part of my position as the disaster coordinator attorney is also to run our statewide disaster practice group. And then during activation, I'm on the state EOC's mass care calls, and I'm able to keep up the activities that the state is participating in and getting going after the hurricane, well, before the hurricane and afterwards. And right now, I can update you on the a number of FEMA individual assistance applications so far that we have in Florida. Well, first of all, we've had, as of this morning or late last night, 2 additional counties were designated for individual assistance. And so we have a total of 19 counties in Florida designated for individual assistance. And probably the most impacted counties are those along the coast here in Southwest Florida. We have yesterday or today a total of 160,000 applications already submitted for FEMA individual assistance. And according to FEMA documents, so far, a little less than 300 have been approved. And so we haven't had much experience at this point from Hurricane Ian as to what's happening with FEMA's FEMA's applications. I do know in that part of Florida, there are a lot of mobile homes. And if you've been able to see the pictures on TV or on the internet, that you'll notice that many mobile home parks were just completely destroyed. A lot of those mobile homes are folks living in them are our clients, poor and vulnerable populations. Many of them do not have insurance, so they will be relying completely on FEMA assistance to get to start over. Some of them have insurance, but many of them will not have insurance for the additional insurance for peril of a windstorm during a hurricane. So although they felt they were covered by insurance, they are going to get nothing from the insurance company because insurance company has determined that, of course, the peril of the windstorm during the disaster is what caused all their damage. So as I said, again, they'll be relying totally on assistance from FEMA and perhaps later on with CDBG-DR money. But as we know from our experience, and many of you know from your experience, that's a long way down the road. And so with Hurricane Michael, it was more than 2 years before that program was opened in Florida. Hopefully it won't be that long this time. But the other stumbling block for recovery is that many people are living in on family property, or if they're living in a mobile home, it's just been passed down. They don't have clear title to the mobile home or to the property. And so at Legal Services and other organizations throughout the state, we'll be trying to clear the title to lots of people's property. And from experience, we know sometimes we're dealing with several generations, and that can take many years. And so we're looking at, in the true sense of the word, long-term recovery for many of the folks that are experienced or have experienced Hurricane Ian. In Florida, today we just opened up our first, FEMA just opened up their first disaster recovery center, unless one has opened up in the last few hours. That was in heavily impacted county, Lee County. They plan to, of course, open up more of those, and I expect probably in the next few days that will happen. Legal services and legal aid organizations in that area will be in those disaster recovery centers, talking to clients and assisting them with FEMA applications. Already we have people who have will be needing to appeal the FEMA decisions. So we'll be helping people with their FEMA appeals. And so that'll be coming up. And as I said, let's see. We have also, the state has opened, well, they said they were going to open up 2 insurance villages, which they did in Hurricane Michael later on after the disaster. And at that point, people would go to the insurance village and they would be able to talk to people from the insurance companies about their claim. And they were encouraged to try to settle those claims. So yesterday, those were called insurance villages. Today, they're being called initial payment center. So that may be, the name change may be because it's a better explanation of what's going on. And right now we have one of those in initial payment centers, and that is in Port Charlotte in Florida, which is Charlotte County, which was another one of our heavily impacted counties here in Florida. We've opened up disaster unemployment assistance. So those people who have lost their job or unable to go to their job or self-employed and can't work because of the disaster can now go ahead and apply for disaster unemployment. And our state Department of Families and Children and Families has applied for disaster SNAP and indicated that there's a very good chance that we'll be receiving that in Florida. And you may remember that in the past, where we had disaster SNAP with Hurricane Irma, we had extremely long lines and it was hot in Florida. This year, I believe they're going to be able to start making the applications telephonically without having to go to a site, at least initially, to get that. And we still have a number, I believe, at 19 shelters open. 5 of those are special needs shelters. A lot of people will be needing a place to go and live, and that's going to be difficult to find in that area of Florida. So we'll be waiting to see how that happens and how legal services programs down here can respond to that. And that's what I have. I know we'll know more as each day goes by and as each week goes by, and we are ready for, we are here for the long haul.
Absolutely, and we are as well. Thank you, Kathy, for those updates. I do have one question for you, and I'm sorry if I missed this, but you mentioned the mobile home residents who are folks that you have been working with for a long time, who are very low income, who've lost their homes, have no insurance, will rely on FEMA entirely. Where are they now? And what are the prospects for their short and medium term housing support?
Now, many of them are living with family or friends, and have had to move away from their, their home, of course. Many of them are in shelters. The people who lived in mobile homes were advised to evacuate from their mobile home park to someplace else. The long-term prospects, maybe even the short-term prospects, are grim. You know, they will be looking for housing from FEMA temporarily. And after that, the housing outlook in Florida, like all over the country, for affordable housing is grim. So it's going to be very difficult. And I know people in the past think that, living in a mobile home is somewhat affordable, but they're not as inexpensive as one might think, and very difficult to obtain for a lot of poor Floridians.
Okay, thanks very much for sharing that as well, Kathy. I appreciate you joining and all of your work and leadership. And we look forward to continuing to work with you towards all of the needs in Florida. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
And we're going to stick with updates from Florida on Hurricane Ian. And we'll hear next from Gladys Cook, who is the Resilience and Recovery Director from the Florida Housing Coalition. Gladys, I'm so glad you're able to join us. I know you're incredibly busy and on the road right now. So thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you, Kathy, because you gave such a broad and comprehensive picture of currently what's going on. So I'll just add a little bit to what we're doing. We're the technical assistance provider for Florida Housing Finance Corporation. So we work with our state housing trust fund communities, and there's about 28 of them in the 19 now declared counties. And so we've been digging out their housing assistance plans to kind of get a preview of where they might be able to use their funds toward emergency repair and then long-term recovery. The state has a $5 million set aside that they activate with trust funds, and then they'll divvy that out in the next month or so. So it's additional money. It's the State Housing Initiatives Partnership SHIP funds. And so now that there's so many declared counties and municipalities, that money will get smaller and smaller for each local government, but it is additional funding. But the thing with the SHIP program is you can convert your existing program dollars for purchase assistance and things like that right over to emergency assistance. The SHIP program is not made to deal with manufactured and mobile homes. You can only spend 20% of the funds on any kind of repairs on those, but you can ask for a waiver to use funds to repair mobile and manufactured homes. And we pulled some numbers on the number of mobile home parks in the declared counties, and there's 1,107 mobile home parks that's in most of the counties. We just got up to 17 because I just added the 2, but that means there's 158,000 lots that have these, and these aren't manufactured home communities. They're not campgrounds. They're the old trailer parks that were really transitory. They're very high density, and then they have these older units. And so we've been encouraging all along that those older units be replaced at least with modern manufactured housing. But I think that the theme of this disaster, like Kathy was saying, is going to be with these mobile homes. And so back to the SHIP funding, communities can get a waiver to work with those residents. But a lot of these plans that we've looked at, they require that the applicants first apply to FEMA and or use their insurance proceeds before they receive SHIP. And so SHIP turns out to not be the first line of defense for most of these local governments. So we're going to be talking to those local governments about making the SHIP funds more immediate. Some of them allow for home repairs only. So we're going to talk to them about using funds in their disaster strategy so that they can be more flexible. So some of the counties have a deferred loan that's forgivable rather than grants. And, you know, when you have these emergencies, it's best to just make them grants only. A good number of those have funding for rental assistance and relocation expenses, so that will be very helpful. And some of those funds can even be used by beneficiaries to find housing in another county. So if they have to stay in a hotel across the line, then that's helpful. There's a lot of priorities that are kind of all over the place about first qualified, first served basis. We're going to be helping those SHIP administrators to be organized to work with the emergency operations centers, the relief centers that Kathy mentioned that are opening. So that's kind of where we're looking with the mobile home part of this. We also are working with the assisted housing inventory. And those are anything with tax credits, public housing, USDA funded. And there's about 1,000 of those properties with 107,000 units. So we'll be getting those reports soon. It's real soon right now. I mean, we're still in the rescue phase, so it's hard to get real numbers on the damage assessments, but I'm told that some of the damage assessments should be done this week. So then we'll know more. But the Florida Housing Coalition was asked to be co-chair of the State Disaster Housing Task Force. And so that's with the Florida Division of Emergency Management. So we're really excited to be able to be in the front with that task force when it starts up again. And Kathy mentioned the heirs title issues, and we've been working on that as well. And so we're going to be expanding our methodology into these counties so that we can help local governments identify the clusters where heir title issues happen so that we can make sure that those residents aren't disenfranchised from assistance. So we'll continue to do our outreach and messaging to our housing providers. We also will be advocating that when the federal funds, the CDBG-DR funds are allocated, that they get on a much faster track than Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Michael. And so that we can get those funds out sooner. We have 121 local governments in Florida that already have housing offices, and they're perfectly capable to use those, and they're ready to do that. So we're going to be advocating for that. So that's what I have today. And thank you so much for having us on.
Thank you, Gladys. There's a couple of questions that come from Michelle Smith asking about one, whether and how impoverished residents in mobile homes were evacuated prior to the disaster. And she's also asking about what types of facilities are being used as shelters.
Well, I know Kathy might have a little more on that, but I just learned that there were 4 shelters in Charlotte County that were flooded. And so they were moving those residents to a shelter that's kind of east in the rural part of the county, and it wasn't heavily populated yet. So I do think there's a sheltering problem in general because of the flooding. And then the mobile home residents, I mean, they're like everyone else with the prospect of where do you go when you have these warnings. And we know that in Lee County, they're asking, well, why didn't you evacuate sooner? And I don't think there's a flaw in the system, that they did the best they could. But Kathy might have more information on specifically where those mobile home residents ended up.
Okay, it looks like, I think Kathy, oh, there she is. Okay,
Yeah, I can I know that most of the shelters, many of the shelters are in schools in Florida. So that's where they would have ended up. On the evacuation, there were evacuation, first voluntary and then mandatory evacuations. And then people with special needs could get assistance getting to the shelter that took the special needs. The other folks would, have to take themselves there or have some other family or friend get them to the shelter.
Okay, thanks for that, Kathy and Gladys. Again, thank you both so much for all of your work, and thanks for joining today.
Thank you.
Okay, we are going to go back now to hear from one more speaker from Puerto Rico. We'll hear from Ariadna Gaudreau Obear, who is the founder and executive director of Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico. Ariadna, I know how busy you are, and you're also literally on the road, or it looks like you just got off the road. So thank you so much for joining. I'll turn it over to you.
No, I wanted to say how grateful I am for this chance and for the continued support of the National Low Income Housing Coalition to Puerto Rico and to stakeholders on the ground. As Diane was saying, today has been a hectic day amidst 2 hectic weeks after the impact of Fiona in the island. Today, we had a chance to have a meeting with both HUD and Puerto Rico Department of Housing officials, and we were also at a brigade or community legal clinic in Loíza. So basically what I wanted to report was just like a little bit about what's going on with the FEMA applications. I don't want to repeat things that maybe have been already said, but in Puerto Rico, after Maria, we saw Hurricane Maria, that was a Category 4 hurricane. We had nearly 1.1 million applications to FEMA. At this moment, after Fiona, that has catastrophic floodings, but was a Category 1 hurricane, we're seeing a huge number of 775,000 applications for the IHP program. Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico has been working, training volunteers on the ground on FEMA processes, but also providing legal support to survivors around the island. And we are a little bit concerned about what we're seeing on the ground. While it's still very early in the process to say that the statistics that are coming in from FEMA very slowly are telling about denials rates or are telling about what's happening with the title issue, as somebody was mentioning before me. I need to mention that a lot of people in the communities are reporting denials based on lack of verified ownership. As you all know, this was a huge obstacle for the recovery of people in the island after Hurricane Maria, since half the people in Puerto Rico lack a formal title. We thought that after the memo FEMA put out in September 2021, like establishing the guidelines for that self-declaration for informal owners, that things were going to be a little bit more flexible. But on the ground, we are not only seeing those denials, but also we're seeing FEMA officials who lack any kind of knowledge about what's happening with the informal title and how can people like prove ownership. And also we're seeing FEMA officials demanding that people have their documents notarized, which in Puerto Rico means having access to a specialized lawyer who can be the only person that's a notary in Puerto Rico. We are also a little bit concerned about the fact that when people have to call FEMA because of duplication of applications or because of any technical issue or because they're trying to apply via phone, they face a wait time of more than 350 minutes. And I'm talking about having assistance in Spanish. For us in Puerto Rico, which is an LEP jurisdiction, and knowing that these were the same barriers that we faced in 2017, we're concerned about the fact about how will that kind of barriers hinder equitable access to recovery. Remember that in Puerto Rico, communications and power are still unstable in many jurisdictions, and we're like very concerned about this. FEMA opened 9 disaster relief centers around the island. We think this is not enough, considering also that in Puerto Rico, people lack public transportation, and that transportation needs to be ensured so that elders and people with other mobility challenges can visit the DRCs and be finally able to file for their application. On the ground right now, what we're seeing is a lot of misinformation regarding critical needs assistance. I know this is something that the National Low Income Housing Coalition has been trying to get clarified with FEMA, but there has been like a lot of misinformation about what is the critical needs assistance for, who can apply for it. Is that the only benefit that people will get under FEMA? So we're still expecting FEMA answers regarding who is eligible for the $700, what will happen to people who are deemed ineligible for the $700 once they received it. So we have a lot of questions, about what's happening on the ground, and we think that the misinformation regarding the fact that people think that everyone should has automatic access to the critical needs assistance is what's making numbers like increase and increase. Yesterday, President Biden had a very quick visit to Puerto Rico, and among other stuff, he promised that the recovery process regarding CDBG-DR and CDBG-MIT is going to be accelerated. We don't know what that means at this moment, but we know that HUD approved a super waiver, basically permitting that a lot of the funds that are being channeled to Puerto Rico can also be used for to Fiona. Yet, major programs such as CDBG-DR and CDBG-MIT were not included in that waiver, so we're still waiting to see then what will the benefit of that waiver look like and who can access more funding. On behalf of Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico, we're continuing advocacy efforts. We think this is the moment, as many of you think, after Ian, to reform this system that is very, very, very broken, and that is fundamentally a program that discriminates against low-income people, but also against people of color, not only in Puerto Rico, but in other jurisdictions. And I also wanted to use like the final seconds of this time just to say that we are able and we're willing and we're interested in providing any kind of support, and that includes webinars, trainings for free, document models that we have created regarding FEMA and recovery processes in both English and Spanish for people who are working with housing advocacy or with legal support in Florida after Ian or elsewhere, particularly in what has to do with informal ownership, because that's something that we have worked with for the past 5 years. And even when the story is repeating itself, we think that we have learned something that maybe we can share with others who need this help. So Diane, Noah, thank you for the space.
Thank you so much, Ariadna. I did want to ask, you mentioned, and we talked about a little bit earlier about the issue of air properties, and of course, together we were successful in getting FEMA to begin to accept alternative documents. What have you seen so far in terms of how well is FEMA doing in letting people know that these other types of documents will be acceptable for assistance?
It's quite horrible, because the thing is that if you don't have access to the September memo, if you don't have access to that kind of information, basically, if you're not a lawyer, what's going to happen is that you don't even know that a declarative statement is possible. Using the outreach of organizations as Ayuda Legal Puerto Rico, which is an independent non-LSC program, is like very difficult to get people to know. And also it's the duty of FEMA to tell people. So we're asking FEMA to at least place a copy or model in the disaster relief centers, but this is something that is not happening. And we're already receiving complaints about inspectors refusing to accept documentation that is not a formal title. So we're back in 2017 in that sense.
Okay, well, thanks for that update, and clearly a lot more lot of pressure that we'll need to put on FEMA to make sure that they get it right this time. Ariadna, thank you so much for all your hard work and leadership. Thanks for joining today. Take care. All right, now we are joined by Caitlin Jarkovich, who is a special assistant to President Biden, and she's a senior director for resilience and response with the National Security Council. Caitlin, I'm really grateful for you joining on during such a busy time, and I will turn it over to you for your remarks. Thank you for joining us.
Diane, thank you very much. And I want to thank all of those members of the Disaster Housing Recovery Coalition who are focused on ensuring that we are driving equitable response and recovery into the communities that need it most. I am really honored to have been invited to speak with all of you today. This is obviously a very timely conversation as we are in the early stages of recovery in Puerto Rico from Hurricane Fiona, and really still in the midst of responding to Hurricane Ian. And I've had an opportunity, as I've been sitting here working on the president's trip to Florida tomorrow, to listen to some of the conversation. And I understand, I mean, you all are very aware of how acute and tragic the situation is on the ground. The president very much takes his role as consoler in chief seriously, but also understands that the federal government has significant direct federal assistance that it can bring to communities in their greatest time of need. He has traveled to dozens of communities impacted by disasters, from California to Louisiana to Kentucky twice in less than a year. Yesterday he was in Puerto Rico, and tomorrow he will travel to Florida to meet survivors and to underscore his commitment to ensuring that he is helping and driving and leaning in to the federal response and ensuring that communities have the support that they need to recover, both in the short term and the long term. He's been on the ground and he's seen firsthand not only the devastation, but how the federal government currently supports the kind of mid to long-term recovery of communities. And I want to emphasize that he knows that we can do better and has placed a priority on re-envisioning how the federal government supports communities that have just gone through a disaster of the proportion of Hurricane Ian or Fiona. And in fact, I just came from a meeting where we were talking about what he would say tomorrow to the people of Lee County, of Fort Myer, and the challenge that this is just, there's a very long process ahead. And when you are a survivor and you are looking at your lot and there is nothing left, it's a very hard thing to, to be positive about what the future holds. But we have learned time and time again, really the resilience of American communities across this country. I know that there are a number of disaster survivors on today's call. I know that you are attempting to navigate what are cumbersome and bureaucratic processes, programs in the federal government that are siloed, and systems and materials that are difficult to absorb and to understand. They're hard for me to read, much less are they oriented to survivors who may have lost all of their worldly possessions, may not have a phone or have the infrastructure to connect the phone to the mobile infrastructure. They may not have housing, things that we take for granted. We are working to address these challenges. You've heard a little bit about what we've done, for example, on the demonstrating property ownership, but that's just a small piece in the bigger picture. And we are aware that much more needs to be done. It is going to take time, and I think time is not a luxury that we have, but comprehensive reforms do require a whole of government effort. And so while we are looking at how we rethink long-term community recovery and try to streamline all of the various federal assistance programs, provide counties and localities with the capacity that they need to think about long-term planning, how to leverage all of this funding, there is a lot that can be done in the near term to improve community recovery. As I said, this is a priority for the president. We are working across the federal interagency to look at those near-term actions that we can take today to improve how we are providing coordination of federal support. And it's why it's so important that we hear from you, from survivors, so what we're doing now can be responsive to your needs. I want to address a couple of the things that I heard as I joined, but I do want to say that we are in the process of executing on a whole of government effort called Recovering from a Disaster Life Experience, where we are we are working to improve how disaster survivors interact with the federal support system. And that means everything from making the materials easier to read and understand so there is not misinformation, and we minimize the amount of misunderstanding and confusion. It is creating a single entry point for disaster survivors, so they only have to really provide their information once, and that we then make it available to the various different federal agencies that can provide support, mainly FEMA, the Small Business Administration, HUD, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And we are looking at it through the lens of not just households and individuals, but also small businesses. So this is focused on survivors, and then we've got a longer term kind of how do we help communities recover. I wanted to speak to a couple of things that I heard, and I think that this was Diane or someone may have raised this in response to what we're hearing in Puerto Rico. We do understand the need to provide the documents that demonstrate property ownership can be onerous. And this was a priority early on in the administration. And FEMA has been accepting alternative documents to property deeds to demonstrate ownership. I hear you that this is not been yet fully implemented, and we will take that back to FEMA and let them know that. And we also, I think, need to work as Mary Tree said, with the Hispanic Federation regarding the change in FEMA's policy since requests for assistance were made following Maria and the earthquake, and this is something that we will follow up on. I am aware that we also have to work to continue to make sure that inspectors are fully witting of all of these changes. You are not the first to say that they don't understand this, aren't accepting the policy changes. We've heard this in Kentucky and other places. That contract is in the process of being renewed, and I know that the FEMA administrator is interested in ensuring that there is accountability and that these changes are being driven, to meet people where they are. But again, I will note that concern with FEMA. I also want to make sure that everybody on this call has visibility about the Small Business Administration's low interest disaster loan program. Because it is administered by the Small Business Administration, there is often a misconception that this program is only available to small businesses. That is not the case. The SBA program also provides low interest disaster loans to homeowners and to individuals. Now, you do have to have a certain credit worthiness, but it can be helpful for people who are underinsured or don't have insurance, both at the individual and at the small business level. I will just close by saying we know that that this is a challenge that we have to tackle. The president has made it clear that we are going to tackle it. He asks every time that we go into a community that has been devastated by disasters, the progress that we're making, what we're doing. So we have something more reassuring to tell survivors. And so we're laser focused on it, but we need to continue to hear feedback. We think we're making changes. If you're not seeing them on the ground, it's important for us to know that so we can facilitate that with the programs and continue to make improvements. And so with that, thank you. And I'm happy to take a question or two.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. I really appreciate your accessibility and your willingness to really listen and engage in this way. And I appreciated all of your comments and sharing of resources. And I think probably most heartening for all of us on this call was to hear your and President Biden's commitment to re-envisioning, as you put it, disaster response so that it better meets the needs of marginalized and other low income and other marginalized people, because that is so badly needed and something that we have been working on together for so long. So we certainly have a lot of ideas and recommendations in that space and would love to continue to have this conversation with you. There are a couple of questions that many of which we can follow up with you in those future conversations. But one question that I did want to ask you here relates to information. You talked about breaking down silos and how important that is, and we couldn't agree more. So the question is about efforts to improve information sharing between FEMA and HUD. What Margaret Adams says is grantees need access to FEMA's application data quickly so they can conduct needs assessment for CDBG-DR. And I would expand that question too to ask about how FEMA and HUD intend to work together to stand up programs like the Disaster Housing Assistance Program or DASH to meet some of the shorter and medium-term housing needs of folks like those in the mobile home parks that were destroyed and beyond.
So thank you for that question. And I just want to begin by saying we would certainly we welcome an opportunity to sit down and have a more robust conversation with you and to get your additional insights and feedback. Jennifer DeCicero on my team, she's the director for mitigation and recovery, is leading this effort and very focused on equitable recovery, and will work with you to facilitate a continued conversation on this front. Part of the objective of the recovering from a disaster life experience is to ensure that FEMA, SBA, HUD, and USDA are doing a better job of sharing information. We run into privacy issues and other things that we're trying to sort through, but creating kind of a common integrated picture about an individual is what we're trying to get to. It's just like everything in the federal government, never as easy as you think it's going to be. I know, related just to what we can do in the short term before there's a CDBG-DR, Deanne has stood up Criswell, a specialized housing task force that is made up of SBA, HUD, those on the ground in the state, understanding that many of those displaced survivors were in manufactured homes, mobile homes, and that we need to speed housing assistance to them. I believe that today FEMA is going to approve transition sheltering assistance. I think I have that acronym right. Transitional sheltering assistance, which means that we can move people out of congregate shelters and get them into hotels and Airbnbs and other things, and the federal government pays for that, while thinking about how do we quickly, work to restock and get stronger, more resilient manufactured home units into these areas. hope that answers your question.
It does in part, especially the invitation to sit down and talk about it more in depth, which I welcome. Would love to talk more about the TSA program, some of the challenges that program presents for some of the lowest income people, and some of our suggested solutions. So again, I really appreciate, Caitlin, very grateful for your willingness to join the call, really appreciate your remarks and your commitment and the commitment from the president. And look forward to continued conversation with you, Jennifer, and others of your colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now we will turn back to one last update from a disaster impacted community. And we are fortunate to have Adrian Bush on the line to share with us updates from Kentucky. Of course, Kentucky, the disaster was before Fiona, before Ian, over the summer when there was major flooding and tornadoes, and they are still working to recover with a lot of remaining needs. So Adrian Bush is the Executive Director of the Homeless and Housing Coalition of Kentucky, and here to tell us more. So Adrian, thanks so much for joining. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Diane, for hosting this call today. It is incredibly important. So, on July 27th, I got a phone call from my child. She had been with my in-laws in Hazard in Eastern Kentucky for the week, and we had planned to get her return her home that Friday. And she called me because there were horrific storms, and she's 13, and she is not a dog, so she doesn't get scared, but she was like, it is awful. Please, I want to come home. And I'm like, well, you know, it'll be okay. It'll be fine. And what I did not realize at the time was just how much it was going to rain, how quickly all of the creeks and streams that typically do not flood in Central Appalachia would. And I didn't realize it until the next day when we couldn't get a hold of anyone to make sure that they were okay because all the infrastructure was down. And so this particular disaster hits very close to home for me. I spent 15 years of my life in Hazard, and much of my extended family is there. And I was there over the weekend working on mucking out a house, and just the sheer level of devastation, even 2 months after the flood, is just, it's really hard to describe unless you've been there. But I will say, in terms of the local and state and federal response, we have a good network of housing providers, nonprofits, working with extremely low-income folks in Eastern Kentucky. We know that about 15,000 folks have applied for FEMA assistance. The average award is only around $4,000, and so that has hit folks hard. I think if you are not used to dealing with FEMA, it is kind of a shock to the system when you realize how the program is designed, and so that has been hard for folks to navigate. Like Florida, we have challenges with mobile homes. You know, the nationwide average of housing units is about 6%. Consisting of mobile homes. In rural Kentucky, it's about 20%. We also do have challenges with infrastructure, and like in Puerto Rico, broadband remains an issue, and especially in the wake of the floods, like the storms took out so much of the infrastructure. Just normal places you had cell service, you couldn't get through. I think the thing I would like to communicate with everyone is just how incredibly important the work of disaster-related housing is as we enter in this phase of climate change. We in Kentucky, you know, a few years back, there was the report saying that Kentucky was one of the safer states for climate change. And we know that isn't true. We had tornadoes in December in Western Kentucky. We had catastrophic flooding in July that comes after what was catastrophic flooding in March of 2021. And so I think I would encourage the federal government, state governments to really think about housing investments that, you know, are flexible so that we can meet the needs of people who are marginalized, and that we can think about what housing needs to look like moving forward. One of the real shocking things with the widespread flooding in Eastern Kentucky was that much of the flooding that happened was not in the traditional floodplain. And so it's going to require hard conversations about how we move folks literally to higher ground if the floodplain as it's existed for the last 100 years is worthless. I will say that our state housing finance agency, Kentucky Housing Corporation, has done a good job in terms of responding with a database inventory of affected rental units and a place where people can put their units available for rent. Unfortunately, they kind of learned through baptism by fire with the tornadoes in December, but luckily they were able to put those lessons to practice with Eastern Kentucky. The other thing I would like to mention is we are working with stakeholders to try to get some sort of state disaster housing trust fund program up and running. And funded. Obviously, this is something that states are going to have to address. You know, we had the tornadoes, we had the floods. Who knows what is coming next? You know, and it will happen in different parts of the Commonwealth, and we want to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place for the state to respond quickly in ways that perhaps CDBG-DR cannot, or it isn't on the right time frame. And with FEMA and its smaller awards, you know. So this is something that we'll be working on, like what they have adopted in Florida. That was very helpful information. But in the meantime, yes, 2 months out, we still have people living in tents by the side of the road. People are in RVs, and a big fear is that people will go back to homes that are not safe to live in. So with all that said, this is what we're seeing from our partners and friends and family members in Eastern Kentucky. And we thank NLIC and everyone else on this call for the opportunity to share.
Absolutely, Adrienne. And I'm heartbroken by what you and so many other Kentuckians are going through and how many needs remain. I really appreciate you joining to share it. I think it gives us all the sense of urgency that we need to really redouble efforts and make sure that resources get to all disaster impacted communities, including those really hard hit in Kentucky. So we're with you in the struggle and really appreciate you joining the call today. Thank you. So we have just a few minutes left on today's call and want to just kind of zip through relatively quickly some important information, especially about the federal resources that are available now. And then a little bit more quickly than that, some of the principles that are guiding our work and the top administrative and legislative priorities that we have. And we'll spend more time diving into these on future calls. So first, I'm going to turn it over to Noah Patton, who's a housing policy analyst at NLHC. He really leads most of our disaster housing recovery work, and he's going to share some of the federal resources and announcements that are up now. Noah, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Diane. Yeah, just to quickly hop in for the sake of time, rolling through these federal resources, obviously, looking at both Hurricane Fiona and Hurricane Ian response, FEMA assistance has been approved, first for Puerto Rico for the entire island, and then 16 counties in Florida, as well as the Seminole tribe. You can go to disasterassistance.gov to apply. An additional point for that would be in Puerto Rico, critical needs assistance is also been approved. That provides immediate assistance of up to $700 for disaster specific needs. But again, an important point with that would be the application for both is the same. So make sure that you are fully stating all damages and so forth when you fill out that application. It's not just for the $700. Moving along, we did see a note from ICE stating that it would not be conducting immigration enforcement procedures at shelters or food banks. The Border Patrol has had a longstanding policy that disaster recovery centers are not are safe zones free from activities from the CBP as well. And then moving along to HUD. HUD has stated that they're working with PHAs to facilitate housing assistance to residents there. And additionally, they, as many folks have said, there's super waivers out providing additional flexibilities for CDBG grantees, housing opportunities for people with AIDS, housing trust fund, and a significant amount of mortgage assistance in line with Fannie Mae as well. Just take the next slide. Cool. For USDA, talking about food assistance, there is a SNAP waiver in place for Florida, allowing the purchase of hot foods through October 31st. Typically, you can't purchase hot foods with SNAP, but that rule is now waived through the end of October. And additionally, Puerto Rico, while not eligible for SNAP, does have a nutrition assistance program, and a waiver for hot food purchase under that program is in effect through October 9th. So just another 5 days there. In addition, IRS offering tax relief through February 15th, 2023 for individuals and households affected by Ian and residing or owning a business in Florida. And then finally, as I alluded to earlier, Fannie Mae does have a variety of mortgage assistance and disaster relief options. These may include forbearance for payments during the period of disaster recovery. Homeowners and renters can call the number on that slide or visit knowyouroptions.com to find out more information about that. And with that, I'll turn that back over to Diane and then Sarah, perhaps.
Yeah, thanks, Noah. We can turn it right over to Sarah to share principles for recovery. Sarah?
Absolutely. These are the 7 principles that underlie all of the work that we do through the Disaster Housing Recovery Coalition. They originated from our partners in Texas Housers, and we added to it with input directly from our 850 members of the DHRC, including those with firsthand experience recovering after disasters. These are the principles that we use to guide all of our policy work. It's the principles that we think are needed to ensure a complete and equitable recovery, and so that we are centering people who have the greatest needs in policy making. I won't go through each one, but we will be sharing these slides afterwards so that folks can dig into it more, and I'll turn it back to Noah.
Hello, coming right back in. Man, that was quick. Well done. For the top DHRC legislative priorities, since we're just about over time right now, I'll just kind of pick the top ones here. The first being enact robust CDBG-DR or HUD long-term recovery funding and ensure public input and oversight to those to ensure that, you know, community input can guide those long-term recovery funds, that, you know, HUD can enforce fair housing law as regards, with regards to those funds, and so on and so forth. In addition, you know, boosting the housing trust fund to replace lost subsidized housing is of exceptional importance as well. When we do lose subsidized housing, there's very little replacement, and so that just further worsens the housing crisis in disaster impacted areas. And I can take the next slide. This is what I was looking for. So first off would be enacting the Reforming Disaster Recovery Act to authorize and reform long-term disaster recovery efforts. As folks that are long time involved with the DHRC know, the CDBG-DR program for HUD is not permanently authorized. Because it is not permanently authorized, there are no concrete regulations surrounding the program. Congress must approve funds, they must write regulations, and you know, perform several additional steps that oftentimes can delay long-term recovery funds from reaching those most in need of assistance following a disaster. So there is that bill sponsored by Al Green in the House and Senator Schatz in the Senate. Moving along to the Housing Survivors of Major Disasters Act, this bill would actually address the title issues that, you know, we've pretty much heard from all of our panelists today. It would provide an expanded list of documentation you can use to show you own your own home following a disaster, and then also standardize the use of declarative statement forms where you can attest under penalty of perjury that you own your own home. In addition, it would provide resources for titling after a disaster and approve assistance to previous victims of disasters that had their claims denied due to this issue that has now since you know, been addressed. Obviously not enough by FEMA. And then finally, I'll just say enact the Disaster Housing Stability Act as well, that would prevent evictions during a certain period of time following a disaster as well. And then in terms of administrative priorities, I'll just say DHAP and DASH, the Disaster Housing Assistance Program was a successful program co-administered by FEMA and HUD following disasters that provided portable housing assistance to the lowest income disaster survivors, paired with HUD approved housing counseling to allow you know, a more permanent foundation following a disaster to achieve permanent housing, I'll just say. And it was very successfully used following Hurricane Sandy and several disaster responses following that. However, it has not been approved since 2017, and we have certainly been pushing the administration on that fact. Senator Warren and Representative Espaillat actually just sent a letter to FEMA and HUD asking for activation of this program last week. And then finally, because Diane hasn't popped up to kick me off, I'll also include that we'd love for clarification that individuals experiencing homelessness are fully eligible for the same FEMA assistance as renters. Many people don't know that if you are experiencing homelessness during a disaster, you are actually ineligible for the vast majority of FEMA assistance following that disaster. And so, you know, oftentimes a disaster will, you know, since disasters impact the most vulnerable folks the most, and people experiencing homelessness are perhaps the most vulnerable people in our society today. Doing this would ensure that they have an actual shot at disaster recovery, and that a disaster does not just further, you know, further their chronic homelessness. So with that, I will wrap it up. Thanks so much.
Very good. Thank you, Noah, and thanks, Sarah. We can go to the last slide, please. So we covered a lot of information on this call. I'm so appreciative, again, for all of the community leaders from impacted states that joined us today to share the needs on the ground. And we certainly are committed to continuing to listen and work with you towards a just and equitable recovery. We will be having these calls weekly. Moving forward, there'll be for an hour each call every Tuesday at 2 p.m. And you can see the registration link on the screen. There is also a disaster housing recovery working group every Wednesday at 2 o'clock. That's typically a smaller group with more room for conversation and discussion to work through these issues. And that's led by Noah Patton. Also led by Noah is our DHRC Puerto Rico working group, led together with many community activists and leaders from Puerto Rico. That's every Thursday at 3 p.m. If you'd like to participate in that, you can email Noah, and there's his email address is on the screen. And then just a reminder that we are going to be going back to our national housed campaign calls every other Monday at 2:30, and that next call for the housed campaign will be on Monday, October 24th. But please do join us again next Tuesday for our next National Disaster Housing Recovery call, so we can talk in much more depth about the work we have. Clearly, we have so much work to do, but we do have we have made progress that we have to build off of now to hold FEMA accountable to some positive changes and to move forward some already introduced legislation that would have a big impact. I also want to point out to you that NLHC has a new resource page that was included in the email for registration for this call, and you can check there regularly. We will be updating it with information from the administration, from Congress, any updates related to disaster housing recovery. And you can also check our Friday newsletter, which is called The Connection, which will have a roundup of those updates as well. So lots of ways for you to stay updated and to get involved. And we really welcome your involvement because there is so much work to do. So thank you very much again for joining today. Appreciate you all. Take care, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.